So we're here to conduct a part 2 Talkback episode with our open table. And today we're joined by Mark, who is pretty much the focus of this table for at least the beginning portion of it. And last time we talked about people's origin stories of TTRPGs. So I turn it to you, Mark. How did you get into TTRPGs?
TTRPG, so that's an interesting discussion. I guess I got into it a little bit later than most because I actually started in college. I started at Brown. So I'd had the nerdy group of friends. I actually went LARP then TTRPG, but eventually when I'd made some Pathfinder friends out in, what house was it? Tech House, out in Tech House. Had me over, got me interested in the idea of adding a little bit more color, a little bit more liveliness to some of the fights I'd been able to act out, but not fully and faithfully describe. So bringing that back to my friends, my first table that I led of about 5 people all congregated in my parents' basement, trying my best not to wake people up because it was the middle of the winter and light was going down quite quickly. It was an interesting experience, especially with your very classical, nerdy, geeky characters, somewhat maladjusted.
Did you know about TTRPGs before you played at Tech House, or the zeitgeist of nerdity in games?
I'd kind of known about it. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I remember seeing a 3rd edition book back in middle school and not knowing what the hell I was looking at. I thought the sword pictures were cool, but that was
sure, yeah. It's usually what draws young boys in, the sword pictures other than the monster pictures.
But I mean, it was a homebrew game of about, I don't know, probably about a year or so. Folks still talk about it, we still have the memes about it, even though the friends have gone away. And then
that's the magic of games, it brings people together.
Oh, absolutely. And then after a while, you know, the table got a little bit, you know, a little bit disinterested with wanting to return, and people set their own kind of pursuits. I left the scene for probably about 10 years. Just because, I don't know, I'd never... I know the prep that goes into being a player, and then the prep that goes into being a DM. I wasn't really prepared for both between a whole bunch of life events, but go figure when the mantle falls on you, you don't really have much of a choice but to pick it up. So, sure. You know, outside of this, I've got my personal table, a group of church friends, and go figure just about every single one of them either completely new or seasoned DMs who'd never played in multiple many years.
Yeah, we talked about that last time with Errol's. This is Errol's first gaming TTRPG experience, and to have it be this way was like a very interesting insight. So to have another table that you're controlling with first-timers, newbies, you must see a lot of like magic in terms of like not knowing norms or cultures or rules or boundaries.
Well, it's not even newbies because, I mean, like, it's a very varied mix because you've got 2 extremes. You've got the old timers. You've got somebody who originally started playing in 1st edition, and then 2nd, and then 5th edition, like seasoned DM, and then you've got absolute children in terms of the landscape. So, I mean, yes, I'm seeing them, but I'm also very well encouraged by the seasons of tenured DMs who have been very, very gracious about helping me learn the ropes and helping me get accustomed to making the correct calls and building encounters. So, I mean, yes, it's that, but also I think I think that the quality of the community was also very good. People willing to be patient with each other, people willing to kind of yes and things, not even just in game, but also in the pursuit of all the things outside of it. Whether it was bringing, you know, souvenirs or merchandise, like they had actual dragon coins that they brought in the first game. They had the 3 Dragon Monty that they brought in. Like, the enthusiasm was just absolutely infectious, and so, you know, even though I'm still learning the ropes, I'm still not nearly as tenured as I'd like to be, they've made it quite easy to enjoy myself.
Committed players are wonderful. those that bring the magic to the table, as you guys have as well too. I would want to bring it back to ShadowDark and our current table going on here, and I figured a lot of this portion of this is going to talk about Galivan, your character.
Sure.
The story that has unfolded in the past 10 episodes, but I actually wanted to bring it in with Nick and Brandon. Nick specifically, because you met Galivan before this production actually started. Tell us a bit about that. In those open tables before we actually started getting to this studio production.
I really enjoyed meeting Galivan because I loved that we both followed Geed, right? Like, and this is my first experience with ShadowDark, so I had no idea who any of these, gods were and what they represented. Like, everything I read was like very little and like very kind of like surface level. And so when I read Geed, I had like this one idea for who my character was and what their relationship to Geed was, and then I played that, right? And then Galivan comes in, who also follows Geed, but is a completely different character. And so one of the things I loved about playing with Galivan was that juxtaposition, where, like, I definitely viewed Galivan as somebody who was like very chill, very kind, very helpful, like, and that was their kind of relationship to the idea of like being like free and enjoying merriment. Right, whereas Miss Biggs's relationship to Geed was, I'm going to be free and have merriment at whatever cost necessary.
Interesting, yeah.
Right, and
the reinterpretation of the black and white words. Yeah.
Exactly, and it was like this very extreme version of it, where it was just like, I'm going to party as big as I can every single time, and I'm going to adventure as hard as I can to make as much money as possible so that I can party even bigger the next time.
So I wonder what that's going to look like without the restraint of Galivan around, and that's something we can explore later on, because we're gonna, when we talk about Galivan disappearing, leaving, unfolding, whatever phrase we want to use. Brandon, what was your experience meeting Galivan for the first time?
So I believe it was either episode 3 or 5, because I remember at one point you had sent me the episode that I was not present for, and I was like, oh, okay, cool. There's a player I haven't met yet.
Right, yeah, everyone's meeting at this table for the first time, yeah.
So I think that was maybe the first foray into the Citadel that at the time.
On camera.
On camera.
Yes. To you. Now that to go back to that, these guys met in the Citadel pre-recording, documentation. So that's very interesting as well. And we sort of addressed that in terms of the experience you guys had, which unfortunately is not recorded, is in the ether. And I sort of tied that up to like an alternate reality of the Oriss that you guys have experienced.
Sure.
But we'll get back to that.
Yeah, I mean, I was just trying to understand, like, okay, so I had rolled up Somnolentus as a cleric, and I was like, well, there's already a cleric, so this is going to be interesting. And then we were talking about spells and spell cards, and I'm like, we are like the same on paper at least.
Like, so, ability-wise.
Ability-wise and spell selection-wise. Right. So I was like, okay, this will be interesting, but it ended up not really mattering because Somnolentus has passed. So.
Exactly. He lives on as a spirit.
Yeah.
So going back to the Citadel, which is very pivotal as a site, as a entry point into ShadowDark, as an experience for us as well, because we played that at least 2 times before we actually got to recording, right? And you guys, I think, played at least 1 time in the open table, if not more.
I only played it once.
Okay, yeah.
I was gonna say I played maybe 2 times. I want to say either 2 or 3, something like that.
And then we started recording.
Correct.
Yeah. So I know that was a big, and Errol probably could speak more to this at a different time, of like, there was a sort of reality to it that, probably with the first group as well too, that was recording in the tower that's not accessible at all. So there's these stories that have unfolded within the Citadel that aren't really canon, and I know people always have an issue with canon, and I think that's sort of a magic of doing these recorded live plays, is there is an actual physical canon being added to the library of these stories. But you guys had, Mark, you specifically had multiple experiences with the Citadel that weren't recorded, weren't accessible, and then we come to the table a 3rd time and we bring it up, I think, in that 2nd episode of, what do you want to do going into this door? make everything that you had experience a dream and have a whole new reality, or keep what you had as real and we played that out. I think because tell the story of what your experience was with the Onyx Minotaur or the Scarlet Minotaur the first time.
Yeah. So, and again, like this is one of those situations where it's like it would have been cool no matter what. But I thought it was so cool that it was two members of Geed who like did this and made this like happen. Which was that, right? Like, so this Minotaur, who's this beast, right? Like, we're pretty low level, and every swing that connected was able to take a character out.
Yeah.
Right? So then at that point, it's like, okay, so we can do kind of like the, what's it called? Like the like wearing down kind of like way where it's like we just try to pick somebody back up as best we can every turn, and we just like whittle it down little by little.
Yeah.
But then when you see a monster like this, then my brain was just like, okay, I want to see if I can do something cool or something inventive, and like, let's just see what we can do. And I'm like, well,
which I love.
It's a bull.
Yeah.
And there's a bull statue that has been described as having other bodies impaled on it as part of some sort of ritual. And then so my character was like, well, then I'm going to impale this bull on that statue. And then I was told you got to make a strength check, and I was like, "Whoa, my strength is terrible
to ride this bull."
Yeah, and I was like,
Into
"I'm
the
gonna
statue.
do it." So then I make the first one, and then I'm able to get it over to the statue. But then I had to make another one, and I was like, "Okay, I'm gonna try." And that one fails, and I'm like, "Dang, he's like right here,
primed and ready."
And then Galivan goes and is like, "I got you," and then just takes what was it, like a mace or something?
I believe it was mace, yeah.
Yeah, a mace, and then slams the Minotaur,
sledgehammers it,
finishes it, and like impales it onto the statue.
Yeah.
And that would have been enough, but then the other thing that made me super excited was that I had an odd strength, and they were like, as part of completing this ritual, you get like a +1 to strength.
Yeah, right.
And that also just made me super excited. I was like, I'm never gonna forget this.
Right. Yeah, that was a good, and it was like it's off camera. It's a story that doesn't exist, but obviously we have that experience.
Oh, sure.
To our name, but to come back and revisit the Citadel with this device, the Oriss, that I really wanted to drive home, and obviously that's a big crux of tonight's discussion of reality manipulation and looking into potential futures and saying yes or no, or we need this to succeed or not, to use the Oriss to say, I want that positive roll, I want those high rolls, and have these charges, light up and gears spin, eventually culminate to a reality that didn't exist. I think, what was the vote on that? And obviously, even my memory's faltering despite the recordings.
Oh no, the vote was to exclude that from canon. And I think that, believe it or not, that was more of an in-character decision than anything. Even though there are storylines that aren't necessarily in the current canon, they're still impacting the character. They're still impacting Galivan. So, I mean...
And the story.
And the story as well. Yeah. But I mean, I wanted to kind of draw point specifically to his sense of caution, especially nowadays, because, or I guess beforehand, because Nick, I'm not sure if you would describe Galivan as a little bit more outgoing when you met him, and maybe a little bit more cautious when, in the later episodes. But I mean, I felt like Galivan was a little bit more risk averse going into things because of the maleffects of the Onyx Minotaur, and because of his desire not to be an instrument of harm, and that stayed with him, and to the point where he eventually did, and it weighed on him. That was a lot of the decision behind him going back, is that, he felt he'd lost his way. And in order to respond to that call, he figured it would be best to preserve what he had left of himself, and to go home rather than to risk any further degradation.
And that's so interesting, right? It's because... Yeah, again, it's one of those situations where it's like, I really liked Galivan just because of how, much of a contrast to Miss Biggs Galivan was. Like, a person who views coming to this new land and having these experiences which infringe on the person that they saw themselves as prior to being here as like these negative experiences, and thus naturally that means they want to go home because they feel like they're slowly losing themselves. Whereas Miss Biggs like has this experience and is like, oh, like this is who I was always meant to be, right? Like this is
Like freeing, enabling.
yes,
and,
like a new
soul
part
stirring.
of myself that's like, you know, creating and developing, right? So it's like if Miss Biggs has been presented with that option that Galivan was, I don't think she ever would have wanted to go home. They were just like, I like who I am here more than I like who I was there.
So to see this play out over time as the Oriss powers up, so before we get to the Oriss powering up, so unrestrained Miss Biggs, Galivan's gone. Is that unhinged or untethered, or obviously we don't know where it's going to go, but is that a factor now that Galivan's not here to counterbalance that or show a different side of Yeed or these actions or this reservation or this hesitation? Is that something worth considering, or is it no, probably just checking on as same old business as usual?
I think it's going to depend on who's at the table, right? Like,
Sure, of course, yeah. The unique open table, yeah.
Yeah. I don't think Miss Biggs is going to behave very differently, but I do think that having Galivan there as like a comparison is going to change their perception,
Right.
like somewhat, right? Like there's still going to be a person who takes risks in order to like advance themselves or like, you know, money, like at like, you know, predominantly thinking of themselves. And I think if there's another character similar to Galivan, you'll be able to see some of those. But like without Galivan there, then who knows what it looks like, right? Like now it depends on who else is at the table, right? Like with Galivan, it created these like two extremes.
Yeah.
Where like other people would kind of like fall in the middle where they lay. But like with Galivan not here anymore, like wherever this bottom end is now going to change. It's like how like what becomes the norm of how much people are concerned with like themselves and their goals.
Do you think, do you have
I was going to
Before I
say,
go on to my question?
at some point, I do want to touch base on that just because, you know, the 214th still has adherents, you know.
Exactly.
And the thing is, the level of extremity you're going to see, it's going to be weird. It's about the same type of extreme, but from a different pivot, a different axis. So I'm kind of intrigued as to how that's going to work out because I'm not sure if that's going to amplify any of Miss Big's, you know, traits, or if that's going to quell and kind of dampen some of them, because I think it just all depends on where that's coming from, even the extreme being as it is.
So the fall of the Scarlet Minotaur by Galivan and the rise of the Onyx Minotaur. Do you think Miss Biggs has responsibility for the rise of the Onyx Minotaur?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, I just wanted to put that out there because I wasn't sure if that's the case or not. So that in turn required Galivan to step up yet again, and the underlying bull god influence over it all too. So obviously now we're getting to a point where the Oriss gives you the opportunity, and I don't want to say like butterfly effect, like you never made this decision to come, and so that never it wipes it out. I almost want to think that does exist because it is canon, it is recorded. Those obviously existed. We just haven't seen the reality without Galivan. If we wanted to go back and replay that in a weird way, I don't. But that's how I like to think about this sort of stuff. So as the Oriss powers up, and I'll ask you, Brandon, first. What were your feelings with the power of the Oriss as it was gaining?
I have always been very skeptical of the Oriss. Like, I do not like when gears start spinning or the lights.
Because you weren't there when it was found.
I was not, no. So it was a situation.
He wasn't in that second episode, but the first episode at the New Continent. Though you guys have had multiple experiences of finding the Oriss, I just needed to reestablish that. But he hasn't been there at all from it. So you watched it as an observer.
Yeah, and I was just kind of like.
And what's your recollection of it? How is it framed in your mind?
Again,
just generally.
Just as this sort of arcane, ancient artifact, right? You know, there was a presence in this land that we don't know about. Civilizations rising and falling. I just, you know, mechanically, I like the Oriss, but there's always the trade-off.
Why? Because it saved your butt a bunch of times?
It did save my butt a bunch of times,
Yeah, right.
yes. It's an interesting option, but it's risk-reward, right? Like, who knows what's going to actually happen when we get to a certain point. And when you brought out the checkboxes and presented the option to Galivan and Mark, I was
Keep
like,
going.
oh my God, like, what's going to happen? And again, like, I don't know. I wasn't sure, not being present in the earlier sessions, if the Oriss was a thing or not that had happened in the non-canon timeline, reality, multiverse, whatever you want to call it. And I was just like, not trusting it. I was like, I cannot believe that you presented that choice. And honestly, I didn't know how Galivan was going to react, because from the perspective of Hilarious, I believe it was when we were with the Preservation Syndicate, like, there was hesitation on Galivan's part. Like, I don't know if we should be doing this. I don't know if we should be hurting people. Like, is nonviolence an option? And so with the context of that conflict in Galivan's heart, it was the right and most narratively interesting choice to present, I guess.
So Nick, the Oriss is powering up over all the episodes that you've seen and not seen. You've now seen how it functions. What are you thinking as this Oriss powers up, lights up, spins up?
Absolutely nothing, and that's on purpose. So I was thinking about this as you were talking, where I was like, everything about the Oriss confuses me. Like, I don't understand what it is. I don't understand why it works. I don't understand why people are able to use it in the way that they do. And that lack of understanding extends to my characters and my faction, the Hawkers.
Is that a poor job on the GM, or is that the way it's designed, but it's still satisfactory?
I find it completely satisfactory, and I don't interpret it as a poor job at all, right? Like, I interpret the Oriss as an entity that is supposed to be mysterious.
I agree.
And when I say that I don't understand anything involving the Oriss, like, that's not a critique, but it actually gives, for example, my faction room to be like, well, I know, like, if anything bad happens, like, well, I never understood how this thing worked in the first place.
Yeah. Plausible deniability.
If something bad happens, it's
ignorance
definitely
is not a
my
defense.
fault,
Yeah.
right?
So, don't understand how it works, nuts and bolts. How are these characters using it when they're using it in the physical moment of the game? Is that a question? Because I'm going to address that in terms of, I imagine moments happening at different points, non-linearly, in which people have had access to this thing, and they decided to peer into it, and they see this moment in time that we're now engaged with in the game.
Yeah.
So it's like everyone has it and no one has it.
Yeah. So I understand that kind of like part, right? Like the Oriss is, in some way and shape maneuvering between each of us, that we've all agreed to share it and study it in some capacity.
Right.
And that we have all, up to this point, been rather trustworthy with it, and no one has like ran off with it, right? Like,
right.
I'm taking that as a given, but I'm talking about like the actual like functions, like what is this thing? How dangerous is this thing, right? Like, it's somebody who's never seen a nuclear bomb, tinkering with a nuclear bomb, and just being like, well, I didn't know that it would blow up. I just was using it for whatever. Like, I thought we all agreed to, kind of experiment
help
with this
ourselves
thing.
out.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Now, do you think your characters recall the moments that have been altered? The big example I think all three of you experienced with the bull statue crushing y'all. I think you were there for that, Nick, and you might not have been.
I wasn't there for the second bull episode that was recorded.
Yeah,
I was there for the episode where it got summoned.
Right, yeah.
Because I took some stuff and then it woke up. And I was like,
and then, so I think it was a moment of the bull's trap statue happening and literally wiping out the party, I think doing 12 damage. And everyone was knocked down, and I think the Oriss was taken in. So do you think there's that moment of recollection, and just generally, you can answer this, Nick, of characters remembering those moments that they've altered? Or no, these moments do not exist?
Everyone in my faction would have viewed it as like a dream or an episode or like an AI generated movie, right? Like not something that they remember. Not something that they remember happening that happened to them, but they're like, oh, like this is something that looks real, but I know is not.
Yeah.
And again, right, like that, like choosing to stay in ignorance so that way they can avoid responsibility for any bad things that happen.
And then I'm gonna get to you about the actual power up.
This is gonna sound real like woo-woo here.
I love woo-woo.
In my life at various times, I have experienced what I'll call like Vuja Day, where I will be experiencing something that I feel like I saw in a dream at some point in my actual life. And I imagine the Oriss like that, where there's a reality shift and it's like, I've seen this, but it worked out differently when I experienced this the last time. So I feel like there is a recollection, but it is a doubting recollection. Like, is this just my brain playing tricks on me? Or did something actually happen on some other timeline or in some other reality? Like, I always, and maybe this is just the mystery of the Oriss, right? Like, we're not certain of its origin, we're not certain of how it works, but we're also not certain of its effects as characters.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, so metagame wise, we are aware of what's happening, but in narrative game wise, they're not. Yeah, right. Yeah, how to play that. So, Mark, the Oriss is powering up over time. You've seen it in many instances on and off camera. What have been your thoughts about it?
I mean, Galivan's thoughts have kind of been the same naive thoughts.
What are your thoughts first?
My thoughts in terms of this, honestly, I guess in this case, Galivan's thoughts and my thoughts are just about the same. I don't know what it does, and that's why I've been very wanton about using it. Because
Curiosity.
it's dangerous until it's not.
Right.
It has, like...
Or it's not dangerous till it is.
Right, sorry, yes, that's exactly what I mean. It's not dangerous until it is. I mean, you know, so what? Some gears spin up. So what? Some jewels light up. I mean, come on. It could be some self-keeping timepiece for all. That could be all it is.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah. In game wise, yeah.
Right.
Despite you guys seeing 12 damage to 2 damage and critical hits to misses and so on and so forth.
I mean, like meta, yeah, but it's like, you know, thinking about like if I were to describe that in game, then it would be like, you know, one time we see like somebody being absolutely impaled through like the chest, and another time now it's just like a glancing blow.
Right.
It's like an attack that would have hit like just precisely, right? Like maybe vivisected somebody.
Yeah.
Is now just like a normal hit or a miss.
But you've either seen it with like these Vuja days type of like, that dude just got impaled, but instead it's just a flesh wound. It's just a grazing shot. Yeah. That's a creepy thing to live with or walk around with or carry, you know?
Well, I think it's as creepy as seeing like outlandish like AI videos, right? Like, you know, like think about...
Yeah, we are entering that world. Huh?
Yeah.
Uncanny Valley type situation. It's not even quite right.
Yeah. Well, it's like
the freaky stuff or the stuff that's like, this looks real, but it can't be real.
Those ones, right? Like, I'm not talking, like, if it's on a big screen and you can, like, really see, or you're, like, looking very deeply, then you can see, like, the evidence, right?
Yeah.
But if you're just kind of, like, scrolling on your phone and then something comes, you just see something wow, and you're like, whoa.
Yeah, and
like,
it's in your brain now. Yeah. And later
There's,
on, you're like,
no
did that
way
person really
happened.
do that thing?
Yeah.
So keep going. Sorry, Mark.
Well, no, I was just going to say that, I mean, I think that Galivan doesn't ask questions just because he sees that as a potential tool or method of do-gooding. He sees it as part of the environment in which Geed has created an opportunity for him to enact something good. And so in terms of that, until he can see the evidence, it hasn't really bothered him. Of course, you start to see that turn around a little bit once he gets blessed and he starts to hand out blesses like candy. But I mean, you know...
That's fine.
I mean, it is fun. It's just, I know that from his perspective, at that point, there is a risk mitigation. Because if he can determine that, oh, well, I'm mechanically, very similarly, doing the same thing, then why take the chance that something bad might happen when we know for a fact that, generally speaking, 19 times out of 20, something good will come out of it or will neutral.
Well, that's why I thought it was so shocking and sudden to see the decision to leave. Metagame-wise, having the ability that's very similar to the Oriss, getting more luck tokens, or the ability to reroll, though the Oriss has its advantages above luck tokens and blasts. But then all of a sudden, the decision to leave was shocking and sudden.
It was and it wasn't.
Go on.
So you know, Galivan, his background was a soldier. So he's been on campaign. He's seen the bloodshed. He's been through the gore and the mire, and he left the soldiering profession to become a priest because he thought that he would be able to shift away from that. He didn't realize that in order to be of service, he's going to have to confront some of the toughest parts of humanity, of being. And so when he's getting hit with that square in the face, when he's taken out of a very structured, cloistered element and put into this chaos, he finds himself completely unprepared. And it's interesting because, you know, it can shift into a discussion of faith, where his faith is very new, very immature, and hasn't been tested. And so he's finding himself falling back to things that are a little bit dubious. Things like, for example, waterboarding in one of the previous non-canon...
one of your dreams. One of your alternate realities.
Waterboarding a resident of this island. And granted, out of fear and out of anger and out of wanting to protect the people that he held close to him. But still...
Was that there for this?
No, that is not a released...
I didn't see that side again.
Oh no.
That changed your perspective.
I don't know, but and
maybe M's Bigs have more in common than I thought.
Well, maybe we will never find out.
No, and I mean, that was one step. That was one step of many, you know...
To me, Galivan was the story of faith, the challenge of faith.
Yes.
And
new land.
Yeah, and really pushing it and taxing it, and it represented by the Scarlet Minotaur, represented by the obscure land, and according to the 214th, fertile ground, ripe ground to sow new faithful crop in, but to be met with deep-seated desires of old faith or bad faith or whatever it might be in these, bowl-serving creatures was me, from a game master speaking, the knob that I wanted to keep turning with Galivan, the like driving through line. And everyone, other characters have through lines, at least in my mind as a GM, of things I want to keep driving home and giving opportunity to bring to light or a challenge or to see what type of character they become when faced with adversity. So to have it go left was like, whoa, that even surprised me in terms of like the ability to be here and keep driving forward or to scoot away. Well, was surprising. And then I'll ask you the meta game question after that.
Sure. I mean, it's really interesting that you found that surprising, just because, believe it or not, I didn't. So
yeah, no, that's the beauty of it, right?
For the 214th, they're there for a reason. It's not because they're particularly good at their jobs. They're not there because they are the strongest faith leaders. They are not there because because frankly, the organization of the mission fields, they're not there because they think it's fertile ground. They're there because
they're out of the way.
Not just because they're out of the way. They're taking a very low-risk chance to see what kind of gains come up. And that may become clear as we talk about Arcoria, which is a potential bring-in that I was intending to bring, but we'll see if we do.
Your next character.
Potentially. There's also Illustria. And the thing is, again, they're all are faithful to a degree, but they all kind of have these deviances.
Shortcomings.
Yes, I'd say shortcomings.
Okay,
Quirks.
yes, quirks, yeah. Thoughts or questions? Otherwise, I'm going to ask my metagame question. Is it not... You got a question?
I did, but I don't remember it.
Is there a sort of refreshing restart to the decision you made?
There is. So out of character, Galivan, like, full disclosure, completely pre-made, nothing really new.
Those pre-gens, man.
Oh, absolutely. And I think one of the difficulties was, yes, I could justify some of his falling away as being part of his character and development. Some of it was just kind of hard to, you know, it was just a difficult exercise for me to keep in character as well. So I'm hoping that maybe if I can come back to the drawing board with a little bit more of a developed or more refined character.
At least a fresh start.
Right.
Clean slate. Yeah, and that whole aspect of, you know, even Nick has brought a new character. So did Errol as well, too. Brandon, you've had a couple new characters as well, too.
I mean, that wasn't my choice.
Right. But there's something nice, I'll speak for Errol in this instance, of having just like let me just play a completely different set of stats, personalities, drives, motivations, and just, like palate cleanse and do something radical as opposed to something that's muddied or watered, especially with the off-camera first group, like the stuff that's not really officially canon, that's tough to keep track of or be mired down by or to lose motivation in from a metagame standpoint. So that's fine. That's a metagame answer to just say, no, I just need a fresh start, and that decision to like, you know, boot out is fine.
I do think that Galivan got about as good as he could get. He had some interesting contributions to with regards to his home life. I think that he was a bit of a morale raiser where he could be. I think that he did a decent job of trying to encourage others and trying to keep the camaraderie flowing. I think he's told as good a story as he could in the time that he had. So, you know, I'm satisfied with him
Nice.
going off to be with Elikarn. I'm satisfied with him, you know, taking the opportunity to refresh, and, you know, Geed willing, maybe we'll see him again. Who knows?
Maybe. Well, the future's
Maybe.
uncertain. Yeah, the future's uncertain. So, follow-up, butterfly effects. Any thoughts of what could or could not happen due to this decision?
Oh, I have ideas. Our Curia is going to be interesting if I bring her into play. Just because, so, you know, I've been bouncing this around with Alex in terms of the kind of concept I want to bring. You know, I've loved the martial characters. You can't stop me from playing them. And the 214th, militarily structured, also does have martial specialists, including someone who was intended to be part of the security and the welfare provision of that crew. So when someone disappears out of the clear blue sky, someone that they've been tracking, someone that, you know, is in caught every single night or has their whereabouts accounted for day in, day out, that's gonna irk somebody.
Is it disappears, or is it never have came?
Well, I mean, and again, we've kind of talked about this before. I want specifically to tap into Arcuria's sense of devotion, not necessarily to the faith, but her personal sense of duty and protection. And that's why, for her specifically, I don't want it to be a disappears. I was thinking about having it be a disappears for everyone but her, or maybe her and a few limited folks.
Oh, that's interesting. I like that. I like that a lot.
I think it would be cool to see those interactions of, what, you're crazy. No one's ever, I swear on Geed's holy name that that man was on my rolls. I'd love to see that kind of conflict.
But then you look at the roles and the name's not there. It looks like it never was there.
Right.
Right.
It would be like a fervor or like, yeah, like a faithful fire to just be like, no, this had to have happened, but it is not the reality.
And then for the other people at the table, it's like, you're the first person from the 214th we've ever met.
Yeah.
Right.
Or heard about Galivan.
Yeah.
I thought the line, I think you guys had an exchange of, we were going to talk about Geed, and it's like, that sounds familiar, but I don't think you had that conversation with me. Yeah. I thought that was just a great way of summing up, like, this sounds familiar, but it wasn't with me.
Yeah, and Ilarius scribed a devotion to Galivan on his sword, but doesn't remember why he was doing it.
Right. Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, it's interesting.
And I think it'll be cool in that it also has the side effect of Galivan lives, yet not through himself, but through through the advancement of another player or another character.
That's the beauty of all this, and I've sort of learned to indulge in or let go of, like being shocked by your decision. Well, it's like, of course, I had my own vision of where it should go as like the director of life, and like this should be like this, but then like to be met with something completely different is still opportunity, and I think reflected in like all of Brandon's characters, they have died, but they have constantly come up in different ways as spirits or as motivators, or even in Ilarius's recollection of Senex or Somnolentus. So that's what this has taught me as well too, is like death is only the beginning type of thing, or like sometimes we get so invested in our characters that it prevents other new stories from happening, that I think letting go and rolling with those deaths can become serious motivators or serious like bouncing off points.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's both, right? Like I think it's like an and, right? Like I think that Galivan's story was great, and I think I am super excited about the idea that you have for this other character and their relation to like Galivan's memory. But I'm also like, but that doesn't mean I don't miss Galivan, right? Like that doesn't mean I won't be like, oh man, think about the stories that could have been told with Galivan. Like maybe is now confronted with this choice of, there's this dark path, this place is changing me in ways that I don't think are for the better. And do I follow that, or do I re-find myself in some way or shape? And maybe I'm not the same as I was, but now this is a part of my story, right? Like I think it's both, right? Like I think that it is, we hold on and we work hard in order to hang on to the things that we care about. But when we lose those things in some capacity, that doesn't mean they are wholly gone. It just means they change shape.
Yeah, big time.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, as a player, I felt the weight of that decision when it happened, for sure. There was a sadness that accompanied that. But I think, to the point of bringing in a new character, I think this is one of the things, and being attached to characters, right? I think this is one of the things that the open table also promotes, because it's not the same 4 characters on every adventure every time, right? So if somebody is going to bring in a new character for whatever reason, it's not necessarily disrupting the group dynamic, because the group dynamic is ever shifting by nature of the open table. Which I think is a cool thing.
Yeah. And especially having time flow in between sessions.
And even
too.
by nature of the what is it called? Like the sheet of characters. What did you call it?
Like the roster, or the roster that you have for a faction.
Yeah.
The stable of characters.
Stable of characters also is like, all of the characters have an in-game excuse to be comfortable with going on adventures with not necessarily the same exact party every time.
Yeah, and I think there's some narrative, that's a narrative tool for each of you as players too. You can make all your characters now, and Errol almost did, and I was like, no, don't. Because you don't know what type of character you want to bring in 5 sessions in, 20 sessions in, 30 sessions in, and what characters you have seen, and then you could bring in one that counteracts or one that complements everything we've seen at this point. Plus, unlocking new classes and stuff like that, which is a cool thing as well too. So
yeah, exactly. Now that I have a roustabout,
yeah, exactly.
I'm always looking like who's able to give me back my luck token.
It was Galivan for a hot minute there, and then it was not. So then, final thoughts, butterfly effects for these decisions. Any thoughts? Any ideas? Creative output?
I mean, I just think narratively, it will be interesting to see not only the introduction of potentially a new character, but also will this impact the NPCs we've engaged with?
Sure.
Or, their remembrance. Will it be there? Will it not be? Will there be things in our Venta that are different because they existed through the influence of Galivan?
The Onyx Minotaur, the Scarlet Minotaur being one of those. I'll bring that up as my butterfly effect. Like, is that a device worthy of playing upon?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I wasn't sure if you had any thoughts about this, but the one thing that I was thinking about was the Vigilant Spear.
Yes.
Right? Like the
Yeah.
thing that was, associated. And like, currently, my character Manchego is hanging on to it. And then so I guess in my mind, I was thinking, maybe with permission, like the session when we discovered that, instead of Galivan being there, Manchego was actually there. And he's been hanging on to it since then. Because I'm also really interested in the idea, because there's this part at the bottom where it's like, this may have more power.
Yeah.
Right, and so I'm thinking about exploring that with either that character or maybe another character from my stable. But I'm very interested in the sphere.
That's the beauty of it, and I think I said it kind of last time too. Is like those elements are out there, and if they're echoed back, sometimes they get louder. You know, as far as like interest or concern are being brought up, because yeah, I feel like my style might be more of putting out threads without intentions and seeing where those threads what they get woven into, what tapestry they get made into. So that's good. I would encourage you to keep bringing that up with Manchego and see how it unfolds, given the dynamic of the characters, the adventure that night, you know, what I'm feeling, so on and so forth. Like that's what I think is the beauty of this emergent sort of storytelling, as opposed to like some scripted like the Vigilant Spear is going to result in X, Y, and Z, and they're going to follow that path. Maybe I have those instances, but then maybe I forget, or maybe we're inspired to do something else. So I didn't even realize or think about that. Maybe Manchego found it in that moment. So you have that ability to like fill in the gaps and like color in the blank spots, which is nice. And I guess final thoughts.
Well, I guess taking it from Galivan's perspective, in terms of anything that he'd want there to be a butterfly effect on, I mean, he would hope that to some degree that he leaves behind a gap where he was useful that may give others the opportunity to shine, that'll give others the opportunity to be gracious to each other and to be of service to each other, and that will be a blessing to them. That would be Galivan's wish.
I like to think this isn't the last we've seen of Galivan in some way, and I can't wait to see how he crops up in the future, whether in name, in concept, or maybe in literal actual character returning in some way, shape, or form. I mean, if you can Oriss your way out, someone might Oriss your way back in. I don't know. I don't know. And where would you think there's powers beyond just that as well, too, in the Oriss?
So, I am curious to see, and this is taking the meta into account again, right? So, the first uh-oh moment during that exchange was when you pulled out the sheet with the check marks. And I was like, there's check marks, but there's also big boxes on there too. And now the Oriss functions a little differently than it did previously.
Right.
And I think sometimes the scariest monster is the one that you don't see or don't know. And that's kind of how I feel about the Oriss. Like,
Sure.
It is a useful tool, but there are consequences to using it. And, I am intrigued, but I am also very wary.
So you are telling me that there is a potential that an even bigger gem will light up on this thing, right?
Miss Biggs refuses to acknowledge that it is potentially a monster, right? Like, it's the type of person who looks at a beholder and is like, oh, how cute, it has so many eyes. Like,
It's eyeful. I'm seeing a lot of things. Well, I'm curious to see how it unfolds and what it grows into and what adventures will unfold with new characters and the ones that we know. And I look forward to talking back 10, 15, 20 episodes out when we get to meet and experience those adventures. So thanks for doing the Talkback today. And we look forward to those new adventures.